Friday, and welcome to another edition of True Crime and Felines with one or more of my fabulous felines, who Freddie is blocking my script, so... For those that are new here, my name is Brandy, and every Friday I bring you a true crime case or mystery. And if you are a returning subscriber, welcome back, my feline friends. Now, I promised you a true crime case this week because we've been doing a lot of mysteries. So, I bring you a serial killer case. Dun dun dun! This week's case is about a Canadian serial killer who used his pig farm to throw wild parties and murder several women over the course of about a decade or more. So, let's get started. Robert William Pickton was born October 24th, 1949 in British Columbia, Canada. Now, he often went by his middle name of Willy as well, but in this video, we're going to call him Robert. Now, Robert was born to Leonard and Louise Pickton, and they were third-generation pig farmers, and they lived just about 17 miles out of Vancouver. Now, Robert did have an older sister named Linda, but she was actually sent away from the pig farm when she was young. The family believed that if you were going to raise a lady, you shouldn't raise her on a pig farm, so she was sent to live with relatives to be raised proper. Now, Leonard and Louise would have another son after Robert and named him David, so Robert and David would grow up together on the pig farm. Now, Leonard was known to be like an abusive man, and the boys really didn't have a lot to do with him, and they were closer to their mother, Louise, but Louise wasn't really the lovely and caring mother. Excuse me. Why do you always have to mess with my microphone? Where was I? Oh, yes. So, Louise, although she cared for her sons, the pig farm came first. She would make Robert and David work the pig farm from a very young age. That was a priority, even before the boys' personal hygiene. See, they would get up early in the morning and do their chores on the farm, and then Louise would send them to school smelling of manure and all dirty and just stinking to high heaven. So, of course, going to school that way, they would get nicknames such as Stinky Piggies. Now, for some reason, Louise was very not into showers and would force the boys that if they were going to wash, that they need to take a bath. And this would stick with Robert as an adult as well, that he would rather take a bath than take a shower. Now, Robert was, in special ed and didn't do very good in school. So by age 14, he had actually dropped out, and he got a work as a butcher's apprentice. But by 1970, he had quit that apprentice job and actually started working on the family farm full time. By 1978, both of Robert's parents would pass away, leaving the farm to the three siblings. However, Linda, who never lived there, really didn't want anything to do with the farm, and David only wanted to take over the house and really didn't want to work the farm either. So Robert actually agreed to work the farm pretty much on his own. Since David took the house, Robert then brought in a trailer and was living in a trailer in a remote part of the property. As I said before, Robert's hygiene never improved. He never dated due to this, and he was relying on sex workers regularly. Now, over the years, Robert would hire workers to help him with the farm because, being a lone person working the farm would be too much. And one of his longest employees that was employed there was named Bill Hiscox. Now, Bill explained that the farm was kind of a creepy looking place and that Robert was actually a pretty quiet guy and liked to be alone. He would go on to say that Robert would occasionally have really bizarre behavior that made him stand out to people, but he knew Robert didn't take any drugs or anything, so it was just Robert's personality. Now, as the years went on, Robert became a little lax in taking care of the farm, and the farm kind of fell into some disarray, where by the end they weren't farming at all and just had a few pigs here and there on the property. So in 1996, Robert and his brother David decided to start a nonprofit charity called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society. You just can't make this stuff up, guys. This nonprofit claimed to organize, coordinate, manage, and operate special events, functions, dances, shows, and exhibitions on behalf of service organizations, sports organizations, and other worthy groups. Now, even with a fancy description like that, what it mainly was is the brothers were just holding wild, drunken raves on their property. These raves included live music and entertainment of the sex worker variety. The brothers even converted their once used slaughterhouse into a party venue where most of the parties were held. Now, these types of parties would attract many people and became well known around the area. They would attract up to 2,000 people per event, and even the Hells Angels would frequent the farm as well. Now, in March of 1997, Robert would actually get arrested. Now, Robert had attacked one of the sex workers that were at the farm. Her name was Wendy Lynn Estetter. Now, Wendy explained the story and stated that Robert had lured her into his trailer with promise of drugs or alcohol or paying for sex. Now, Wendy would go on to explain that Robert had hired her for the nightly entertainment, and after they were done with their transaction, he attempted to handcuff her by putting a handcuff on her left wrist and then promptly stabbed her in the stomach. Now, even with her really bad wound, she was able to actually disarm Robert and stab him with his own knife and run away. She flagged down a passing car who then took her to the hospital. Not long after that, Robert went to the hospital because of his stab wound, and then they ended up at the same hospital. Now, Wendy still had the handcuffs on her wrist, and when they were treating Robert, they found a handcuff key in his pocket, which fit the handcuffs that were on Wendy. So the hospital staff actually removed the handcuffs from Wendy. Wendy did make a full recovery, and then Robert was arrested for attempted murder. But soon after, Robert actually made bond, and in January of 1998, the charge ended up being dismissed without a explanation of why, but more on that later. Now, months after this attempted murder incident, the brothers were actually being sued by the city because they were violating some zone ordinances. What the city claimed is that they were zoned for agriculture, and one, they weren't doing anything farming, and that they were holding parties. So it was more of a recreation thing than an agriculture. And they found out that they converted the slaughterhouse into a party venue, so this was a big no-no. However, the brothers completely ignored this legal pressure going on and ended up having this huge New Year's Eve party bash that next December. This party got so much attention that the city actually put in an injunction that no more parties were to be held on the farm ever again, pretty much. That police were authorized to arrest and remove anyone that may be trying to attend these parties. So now these wild drunken raves were shut down. The nonprofit status actually came into question and was suspended because the brothers could not provide the required financial statements proving that they were a nonprofit. And eventually in the year 2000, the nonprofit was shut down and disbanded. No more Piggy Palace Good Time Society. Now, Bill Hiscox, he was the longtime worker on the farm. He started becoming kind of suspicious because a lot of women, mostly sex workers and drug addicts that were actually frequenting the farm during the parties, they actually started disappearing, and Bill kept seeing flyers of these missing women, and he recognized some of them, and others he said that he would find like purses and personal belongings that he thought belonged to these women on the actual farm. Now, Bill did go to the authorities with his concern about this, but not much was done about it. It wasn't until February 6th, 2002, when a tip came in that both Robert and his brother David were having some illegal firearms on the property. So a warrant was executed and police descended on the farm. Both brothers were arrested and thrown in jail, and they were charged with various weapon offenses. Now, while the police were searching the farm, they were running into these personal belongings that belonged to women and other things. So the police then went to obtain a second search warrant to actually search the farm for the missing women. While they were trying to gain that warrant, both brothers were released from jail, but they kept Robert under surveillance at this time due to his 1997 attempt at murdering a sex worker. So eventually they did get that second warrant, and they again descended on the farm and started searching it. And guess what? They found a lot of awful stuff, including human remains. So on February 22nd, just a few weeks after Robert got out of jail for his weapon offenses, he was arrested again. And he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder based on the evidence they found on the farm. The authorities had found 2 remains of Serena Abotsway and Mona Wilson. Now, a few weeks after that, more evidence was found, and Robert got 3 more first-degree murder charges for Jacqueline McDonnell, Diane Rock, and Heather Bottomley. A bit after that, a 6th charge would come in for Andrea Josbury, and on April 9th, shortly after that, a 7th would come in for Brenda Wolfe. Now, a couple months would go by, but on September 20th, because the police were still searching this farm this whole time, and it was hard because it was a very large farm, and there were human remains everywhere. So on September 20th, 4 more charges came in for Georgina Papin, Patricia Johnson, Helen Hallmark, and Jennifer Fergminger. And then 4 more charges would come in for Heather Chinnock, Tanya Holk, Sherry Irving, and Inga Hall. They came in October, bringing the total first-degree charges to 15. We're not done yet, guys. So the excavations and the search on the farm would actually continue through November of 2003, more than a year after they started. So on May 26, 2005, the final 12 charges would come in, and they were laid against Robert for the killings of Cara Ellis, Andrea Borhaven, Deborah Lynn Jones, Marnie Frey, Tiffany Drew, Carrie Koski, Sarah DeVries, Cynthia Felix, Angela Jardine, Wendy Crawford, Diana Melnick, and someone they could not identify as a Jane Doe, bringing the total number of first-degree murder charges to 27. I'm sorry, I wanted to list all of the women's names because I feel that they need to be recognized in these types of stories, because I feel when there's a lot of victims that the victims' names just kind of disappear into oblivion, so that's why I named them all. And I'm sorry if I mispronounced any names. This was now officially the largest investigation in Canadian history. Now, as the authorities kept searching and the evidence that they keep finding and where they were finding these human remains, a claim was made that Robert would, kill the victim and then feed the remains to the pigs on his farm, or he would ground up the human flesh and then feed that to his pigs as well. But there were other things that were coming out as well, that maybe when he was grounding up human flesh, because he was using the same equipment as he did with his pigs, that there was a contamination, and that when he would serve food at these parties that they used to have, that the people could have been eating human flesh along with the pork. And Robert was still occasionally selling pork to his friends and neighbors. So on March 10th of 2004, the government revealed that, Robert may have ground up human flesh and it may have got contaminated with pork that they had. So they issued a warning, but admitted that they didn't know how much may have been contaminated or when it was contaminated. And by then, people probably already consumed it. Ugh. But even so, they stated if anybody had any pork left over from that specific farm, they were to turn it in to the police immediately. After they were done searching the farm for over a year, they began the formal investigation on Robert, and they held a preliminary inquiry first. Now, at this inquiry, they brought in Wendy Lynn Estetter, who was the woman that Robert attacked in 1997. Now, it was discovered why her case was dismissed and why Robert never went to trial over it was because Wendy was actually a drug addict at the time, and the prosecutors felt that she wasn't a reliable witness and that they wouldn't be able to secure a conviction on Robert, so instead they just dropped the case. Now, when Robert was arrested back in 1997, they had actually taken his clothes and his boots that he was wearing that night, and they had been kept in a police locker for over 7 years. Well, now that he was arrested, they actually pulled that old evidence and did DNA lab testing on it. And not only was Wendy's DNA found on those clothes and boots, but 2 other women were found on his clothes and boots as well. Remember, he didn't really, clean up much and wore the same clothes a lot. Now, those women were Andrea Borhaven and Kara Ellis. So he had been actually killing women before 1997. Wendy was not his first victim. But because these women were either sex workers or drug addicts, they were not given, the police resources that they probably deserved. But that's not all, okay? So they discovered in 1998, someone had called the Vancouver police tip line and saying that Robert should be investigated on the disappearances of these women that were happening at a rapid pace, especially the sex workers that were disappearing at the rate they were. Now, a detective was assigned to the case, and the detective had an inkling that a serial killer may have been responsible for some, if not all, of these missing women. But try as he might, he just could not secure any police resources to appropriately investigate the case. And it just kind of got pushed to the side. Then in 1999, another call came in to the Vancouver police tip line stating that Robert should be investigated because he had human remains in a freezer. Now, the police did go out and interview Robert at this time, which of course he denied everything. And they asked to search his farm, which Robert said, sure, go ahead. But that search never happened. I don't know if somebody dropped the ball or because he said yes, they considered that a not guilty party. Now, the person who called the tip line only identified themselves as somebody who worked on the farm for years. So, Bill, were you still trying here, buddy? Now, Robert's trial began on January 30th, 2006. The judge put a media ban in place, so no one could know the actual details of what was found on the farm and any details of the case whatsoever. So the public was pretty much in the dark of what was going on with this guy, that they know the farm was searched, there was mention of some bodies, but that's all they knew. Robert would go on to plead not guilty, of course, to these 27 counts of first-degree murder, and even stated that he was not responsible for the actual murders, that he just helped get rid of the bodies. Although he never said who was actually responsible. It was very vague and he never went into detail. Now on March 2nd, during kind of this beginning trial, one of the counts of first-degree murder was dismissed, and that was dismissed on the Jane Doe due to lack of evidence. Now remember, a lot of these human remains that were found were so decomposed, or they were just bits and pieces because, he fed them to the pigs, or they've been just left out to rot for years. A lot of times you didn't even know how they died. They were having this problem with, there's now 26 counts because the one was dropped. The prosecution was having trouble, proving. But what they did have is for 6 of the women, they had a pretty strong case. So what the judge ended up doing is splitting the charges, where he put 6 charges into the trial, and then he took the remaining 20 and they suspended those for now, and he'd be tried for those later. So they were going to split them up into different trials. The judge stated that trying all 26 counts would be kind of too much of a burden on the jury and would take so long to complete, which then would take taxpayer money, of course, and it would give, the trial an increased chance to actually end in a mistrial. So that is the reasoning why he split those up like he did. So on January 22nd, 2007, the trial started to get some legs finally. And the trial moved forward on the 6 counts of first-degree murder. Now, at this time, the media ban in the majority, not everything, but the majority was actually lifted. So the Canadians were actually hearing the details for the very first time. And let me tell you, they were not great. Trigger warning. If you don't want to hear the details, wait till you can fast forward, and I'll give a thumbs up that I'm done, and you can fast forward to that, okay? So the evidence found on the property consisted of skulls that were cut in half, and severed hands and feet were then stuffed inside the skulls. One victim was, her extremities were severed, but then her torso and head was shoved in a garbage bag and put in the barn. There were remains found that went through a wood chipper. So remember the freezer with the human remains? There were actually human heads that were in the freezer alongside the pork from his pigs. So there was definitely some contamination there. There were a lot of things where they found human bones and jaw bones. They were found in the pig pens, so that provided proof that he did feed the bodies to his pigs. And if that's not sick enough, in Robert's trailer where he lived, they found a 22 caliber gun that had a rubber sex toy over the barrel, which contained both Robert and a victim's DNA. Oof. When they asked Robert about it, Robert stated that the rubber sex toy made for a great silencer. Ugh. Inside Robert's trailer, along with that gun, a mattress stained in blood was found, a syringe with like some blue liquid in it, and a Spanish fly aphrodisiac. Apparently he needed a little help. There's the details. I'm done with the details, okay? So witnesses would actually be called up to the stand. There was about 100 of them that were called to the stand. But the two main witnesses that stood out were actually Robert's friends. One of Robert's friends went on the stand saying that Robert told him that the best way to kill a heroin addict was to fill a syringe with windshield washer fluid, blue liquid in the syringe, and inject her with it, and that she would die, and authorities would dismiss it as like an overdose. So apparently that was happening. Another friend or associate that kind of worked on and off on the farm of Robert's say that Robert once told him one night when they were having dinner that he went into detail about how he was killing these sex workers and actually went through the motions physically to show him how it was being done, that he was handcuffing them and strangling them and then bleeding and gutting them before he would feed them to the pigs. Now, that's what he did to most of them. One of them was shot with the gun, I guess you could call it, and then others were stabbed. Another eyewitness would go on the stand saying that years earlier, before Robert's arrest, she arrived at the farm because Robert would give her drugs. And she went into one of the slaughterhouses or barns or whatever, and she witnessed Robert with a woman hanging from a hook. She was already dead, and Robert was skinning her. Now, this witness would go on to say that she didn't tell anybody because Robert threatened her, and, she was in fear for her life. Plus, Robert was giving her drugs, so... Now, when the lab staff got on the stand, they testified that they found over 80 DNA profiles on the farm. 80. And they were kind of a mix between male and female, which makes sense with all these parties going on. You're going to leave your DNA everywhere. So on December 6th, the jury went into deliberations and started discussing if Robert was guilty or not. Now, they would send a question to the judge, however, because, Robert stated that he wasn't the one who actually, did the murdering. But the jury, I guess, was torn, and so they sent a question to the judge stating, if we were to find Robert guilty, could they infer that he was indirectly related to the murders? And apparently the judge said yes, which was an error on his part. So on December 9th, the jury came back and actually found Robert not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty on all 6 counts of second-degree murder. I guess they couldn't prove that he was directly the person responsible for the murders. However, Robert was sentenced the maximum that you could get, which is prison for life with the possibility of parole after 25 years, which ironically is the same sentence if he would have been convicted of first-degree murder. Now, after this, of course, appeals were filed and stating that Robert was, of course, solely not responsible for the murders and that the judge made errors in his informing the jurors what they could and could not do and making sure they understood the outcome of their decision. The families of the victims were kind of torn about another trial because, one, he already got the maximum sentence. It's not like he was going to get, more of a sentence if he was charged with first-degree murder, and they really didn't want to go through the details again about their families. In the end, by 2009, Robert had exhausted all of his appeals. They were denied. Now, in late 2010, officials would actually dismiss the other 20 charges for first-degree murder. This would end any prospect of him being tried again for any further murders. Robert's brother David was never charged in connection with any of Robert's crimes. However, I would like to share with you that in 1992, David actually got put on the sex offender registry because he sexually assaulted a coworker. He ended up with a $1,000 fine and 30 days probation. Now, David would also go on to state that he had no knowledge of what Robert was doing on the farm, nor did he ever help cover up anything either. Which to me, I don't know. If David never worked the farm, maybe he wasn't seeing what Bill Hiscox was seeing. But are you telling me that he never went in Robert's trailer and saw the things Bill saw? It just is a little suspicious to me, but that's my opinion. Now, there are also 5 additional women that went missing that Robert is, believed to be implicated with, but no charges have been filed at this time about those women. It's also believed that Robert's very, very first victim actually happened in September of 1978. He would have been 28 years old at the time. So, yeah, if you would have stopped him even in 97, you would have saved a lot of lives, but nope. In May of 2014, the children of the victims actually filed a lawsuit against the Vancouver Police Department and other involved authorities on failure to protect the victims and ignoring that so many were going missing. A settlement was reached, and each of the children got 50,000 Canadian dollars without an admission of liability. So they're like, here's some money, but we didn't do anything wrong. Now, while Robert was in jail when they were searching his farm all that time, he actually confessed to an undercover officer that was acting as like a cellmate that he had actually killed 49 women and that he wanted to kill one more to reach the big 5-0. But he just was in a hurry and got sloppy and got caught before he could do that. As of 2015, the entire property is fenced off and is now owned by the Crown, which is the Canadian government, and all the buildings except for a small barn have actually been torn down. Robert could become eligible for parole in 2032 after serving 25 years. Let's hope that's not approved. But it's a possibility, and he will be 83 years old. So what are your thoughts on this case? How could he get away for so long with so many people milling around his property during those parties? I mean, this goes from 1978 to 2002 is the last victim they believe he took. This is a long span. It does irritate me at times when some authorities, not all, but some authorities, when somebody like a sex worker or a drug addict goes missing, I understand that they have kind of a dangerous life, or they just up and move for no reason and kind of live off the grid. But I think everybody deserves at least a reasonable amount of investigation time from police. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below, and if you would like to become a feline friend, please hit that subscribe button, and I will be back next Friday with another true crime case or mystery with the felines. Bye guys!